had a little wine. So did you.
Okay,
You will remember.
Woman after my own heart.
Just
Oh,
keep
she's
reminding
in
me.
it, yes.
Should I start?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So
We give the floor to Mona.
I'm gonna get started. I have a rather odd title. Orange is not a protein, and I'll hopefully explain that title as I go. But sort of the gist of my project idea is that I was hoping to write a book, and it was a nonfiction book intended for probably upper elementary to middle school kids, kind of connecting ideas of food and health and chemistry to kind of explain these concepts more to them. So I think this was I guess a cartoon or meme maybe that was going around with my parents group on Facebook, and it was funny because every single parent was like, "Oh my God, that's me! Oh my God, that's me!" And that's kind of how I feel when I describe this idea to anyone who actually has children in that age group. Everyone's like, "Can you hurry up and write this book?" Because this is like a conversation that many people are having. I'm hoping that's an indicator that there is a demand for a book like that. But that's one way I'm gauging it. But this is, sort of obvious where, the parent figure or the adult figure is talking to the child who is so hungry, and they're offering some pretty healthy things in the beginning. Do you want carrots? Do you want apples? They're also sort of slightly breaking down by the end of it. They're like, "Chips? Anything? Will you eat anything?" And the kid's like, "No, I don't want." So there's definitely a power struggle that happens when you're choosing to feed your children. And I realize that, obviously some of you don't have children, but we were all children once. So hopefully we can relate to it from that perspective. So in terms of this talk, this is the way I'm thinking about it. This is a quote that I saw at a talk and I'm stealing it shamelessly, and it was attributed to Albert Einstein at the talk, where they said if you were thinking about a problem that you wanted to solve, you spend most of your time essentially trying to define the problem before you started to launch into it. And that really resonated with me. So this is sort of what I'm thinking of this being, that you will give me hopefully lots of helpful feedback, and then I can sort of process that a little bit more. And something that Lois said was about the reading that I had posted, and she said that it felt dense to her, and some of it is, as scientists or chemists, we talk a language, and often I forget that other people don't necessarily speak that same language all the time, so things that seem really fluid and obvious to me are not necessarily to other people. So it's super helpful if you chime in and say, I don't get what you're saying there. And I said attributed to Albert Einstein, because after the talk I went and looked, and it's not really clear that Einstein actually said it, but maybe it makes the quote seem more important. But I like the idea of the quote, so I still used it. So I talked to friends who were children's authors about sort of how to get started with a process like this. And one of the first things they recommended I do was do some sort of survey to see what's out there. So these are some things that I was looking at that I found in our local library, on Amazon, which are the two places I started with. And there's books that are written by scientists, the PhD scientists, or doctors, and they're clearly intended for the parent to read the book. And so they are not at all in any way directed towards the children, but they communicate the idea of children's nutrition. So that's one category of things. When it came to the kids' books, this was largely this Disney Princess Cookbook has an amazing number of reviews on Amazon, and they're all very positive, right? So which makes me think it can't be that bad. But there's certainly marketing involved with that, where you can you can see the types of foods they're presenting there. 50 delicious recipes, pancakes, cookies, looks like, and then eggs and toast, right? So probably some pretty simple recipes, but the marketing there is probably the key there to getting people to buy the book. And then Grace Lynn, I don't know if anyone knows her, but she's actually a local author. So she lives in Florence, and she wrote a book called Our Food, which is a healthy serving of science and poems. I thought that was interesting given the food poetry from earlier. And they're sort of haiku style poems. They're not great poems, I would say, even as someone who's not a poet. And the science seems pretty reasonable in the book, right? But it's sort of very much a picture book where there's lots of imagery and then there's a little bit of words. And that is also this third book, which I actually brought with me, Good Enough to Eat. And I had my kids read it because they're like my consultants in this project. I keep I'm probably irritating them a great deal because I keep coming up with an idea and then I'm like, what do you think of this? Like, here, read this book. So it was interesting because my teenager read the book and she said, the images in this book very much seem like they're for a preschool age audience. But at the same time, like, they're using all these words like carbohydrate, which like a 3 or 4-year-old isn't going to understand, and in a way that doesn't really explain it very well. So there's definitely, I think, room for improvement is sort of my take on this. So I'm certainly not looking to write a picture book. I think I wanted to maybe have a few illustrations, but it'll be mostly text. And my vision of it is each chapter will be a narrative. Start with a conversation between a parent and a child, which brings up some quandary in their food dynamic relationship. So the first chapter-ish that I've written up, I'll give it to you at the end. The child is not eating the lunch that keeps getting sent to school. Right, and so there's a lot of food waste involved, and so that particular chapter will then tackle the issue of food waste. Another chapter could be, the child doesn't understand what a protein is when you're looking to pack your lunch, so then there's like boxes which explain the science behind it. And then from also just chatting with people, the other thing I realize is that anytime you tell people you're writing a book with chemistry, they want activities. Right? Like, they don't want just a book that like tells you things. So that seems like something that, I've talked to people who homeschool their kids. So the way I envision this is each chapter could be kind of like a lesson. You're having this narrative that kind of gives you a hook, gets you interested in the story. And then you have the science, which gives you a little bit more detail about, the background. And then there are things that the kids can try and do based on that. So there'll be things that I call activities or experiments. And some of the experiments really are recipes because, cooking food is chemistry.
Recipes are chemistry.
But there'll be maybe a little bit more language around the science of the recipe in there. So I definitely would love your feedback on this sort of format, or if you have other ideas. So, in this process, I was trying to also understand what children learn about. So there's things that they can read by buying, like their parents might buy a book, or they could get it from the library. Hopefully, the other place they're getting this is school, right? So I reached out to. After having several alarming conversations with my child, I reached out to the school principal to kind of get a sense of what they were actually covering around this topic. And so this is sort of the email that he sent me, and this is the Northampton Public Schools, so our local public school system. So in his email, he said nutrition is taught in the middle school, not at all in the elementary school. And they do one thing that's in PE class every 4 years, where you can earn like a gold medal for eating vegetables. But there's no like explanation for why you eat vegetables, right? Like it's a contest, which still has a noble goal, like you're getting them to eat maybe more vegetables. And then the only other thing that he found in the entire curriculum map that Northampton has is a unit on seeds and plants. And he was trying to connect that with nutrition, but it really is, for any child to make that jump from the seed to grains or protein would be a big stretch. So really not much that...
So wait, Mona, you need to go to a more progressive school, like the Williamsburg schools.
Right, so I'm sure this is very, very old for us.
Just waiting to see if anyone would.
Do they do that? I'm curious.
They have a greenhouse,
Okay.
and they have a garden program, and
Yeah.
that might be. I don't know how much of that is
But they're
growing
the
things,
And Johnson Street has a
growing
garden, don't
things
they?
versus eating.
Right, I think a lot of those
Yeah.
gardening programs are growing things.
Right.
I mean, certainly you're getting exposure
But they
to...
used to have a harvest dinner every year.
Right, but how much of that is explaining
I don't know.
what is on the plate? And, that's sort of where I'm getting at.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I suspect that many children have a sense of good foods because they hear adults talk about them, or you should eat your spinach, or you should eat your broccoli, or we should grow peas and eat them, so they get that, but they don't maybe understand what is it that I'm getting from broccoli or peas, or, So they do have a little garden at the school, so it doesn't sound, I'm not sending my children to like the worst possible school. But,
Are there curriculum standards from the state or that?
as far as I can tell, because science is not part of MCAS, whatever standards there are barely matter. I'll tell you honestly, that's how I think they see it. So hopefully they'll attack some of those things, but it's super variable. And some of it is if you made it really easy for the teacher to teach this, so hopefully if like the book chapters felt like a lesson almost, it could be potentially an easier thing for someone without a science background to feel comfortable doing. So I also looked for national statistics, and the statistics there was 90% of all schools offer nutrition education, right? So in some ways our government thinks that this is not as much of a problem, like it's being covered. But what was interesting is when they were breaking it down, a lot of it was bulletin boards that have nutrition information. And I don't know about you, but when I walk around Ford Hall, I don't see what's on the bulletin boards at all because there's just so much information. It's so overwhelming. It's hard to really process any of that. So I doubt that any kid standing there hungry in the lunch line is looking at the bulletin going, oh, half my plate should be fruits and vegetables. Like, that's really interesting. That's unlikely to happen. So they're not incorporating it in classroom activities. They're not doing tastings, making it fun or interesting for them to think about. So this is an example of something that might be posted on the bulletin boards. And so yes, in the choose your plate figure is up there. So, it is provided to the children. It is, so you could probably check that box off with the USDA and get reimbursed for your school lunches. But there's a small part of this plate or this page, and there's so much other information on there that I really don't think that they're focusing on that necessarily. And then it's also hard, I think, to understand how this image corresponds to some of these things, like the lunch on Tuesday will be Taco Tuesday, right? So if you're looking at it, it's lettuce, salsa, cheese, sour cream, refried pinto beans, probably tortillas or tacos, right? What constitutes half the plate of fruit and vegetables in that meal is not maybe lettuce. I'm not sure how that gets, so I think there's a disconnect there. So in an ideal scenario, if I had immense power and could design nutrition education, it would be something that would get children excited about food, excited about eating healthy foods. And then it would give them the knowledge so they would understand why they would want to choose those things rather than just being told that you should choose those healthy foods. And then it would be made easy, right? So the school lunches would also correspond to those guidelines in a way that where picking nutritious things was easy for them to do. So that's beyond the scope of my project. But I definitely want to tackle this issue of food waste along with the concepts of healthy eating in there. Because I think that many of the meals those kids have are during the school day at lunch where they're not with their parent, right? They're making choices independently without potentially much guidance. So I like this image. I found it on the internet. And it was basically a study done by the University of Vermont saying that when you mandate school lunches become healthier, kids are essentially throwing it away. Right? So that's certainly that's what this image is supposed to show. The girl, I like it, it's Vermont. She has this t-shirt with ice cream on it. This is down in Jerry State. And she's taking her orange and chucking it in the trash. So
It's not a protein.
It's not a protein, right? So I was just curious about some of the study and just the media coverage around it. So I'm going to see if this will work.
She might be doing that because oranges are hard to eat.
Right. So,
You know?
I mean, there's
so
definitely...
if they were maybe cut into wedges, that might be a different
Right.
story.
I think that's true with all fruit and children.
Oh, they don't like it?
You cut it,
Like a cut.
and you put it on the plate, and you make it look attractive, and they'll eat it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So there's definitely like, you know, aspects to school lunches that don't, like a whole apple is definitely
It's on
harder.
the same
Yeah.
idea, yeah.
So some of the coverage around this was very much based on the fact that this initiative was originally Michelle Obama's initiative. So this is a news article where they're talking about, you know, how much waste there is. What I love is the image that is at the top of the page, and you can see this girl like clearly adores Michelle Obama. You know, so the rest of this article is like super negative. Like, the image makes me think, and you know, what a great image, because it's the first lady of the country going to a public school and eating from the lunch line, right? Like she's not too
Yeah,
good to
look
do
at her
that.
light. Look at her face.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled by what she sees now.
She also to me looks Indian American, but so it's kind of interesting. So now I need to find my way back.
All right, so you want to just minimize what you just did. You put that on top of what was already there. Here, let me.
Okay, sorry.
I only have
Barring
25
Nancy's.
or 30 tabs open,
Yeah.
so
Oh, I miss Michelle Obama.
let's not get into that conversation.
Well, I have a second thing that I'm going to show you with that same.
Yeah, she was on Oprah recently. and,
Yeah, her book is on.
She's actually come out.
Do you think it's just a
She has always
different?
had a personal chef,
Who?
Melania Trump.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Michelle. She's always had a personal
Not Michelle.
Is that mine?
So I'm going to apologize in advance, but this is also to do with Michelle Obama. So I'm going to show you this other, and then I'm going to find my way back because it's one of these tabs.
Oh, that was also the wrong one? Okay.
Oh no, that's
No,
okay.
okay.
I just wanted to show this clip, if it will play.
New Olay Foaming Whip Body Wash. Lux Lather with a weightless feeling. Transforms skin from dull to dreamy. New Olay Foaming Whip Body Wash.
Alright, so I'm apologizing in advance because this is a Fox News clip.
Welcome back to Outnumbered, everybody. 2 new surveys could mean big trouble for our nation's Healthy School Lunch program, which is set to expire at the end of September. One study done after the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act went into effect in 2012 found a lot of kids were taking the required fruits and vegetables and throwing them in the trash. Researchers say the amount of food wasted increased by 56%. Meantime, another survey found hundreds of school districts have made layoffs and reduced hours for cafeteria workers, all to offset the extra costs of Michelle Obama's lunch rules. This stuff drives me insane. I used to work in schools. The idea that they thought that they were just going to mandate that kids put these vegetables and fruits on their plate, and somehow that was going to force them to eat it or make them want to eat it. The food has to taste good, does it not?
56% of food wasted. You know it's never wasted? Pop-Tarts. Ever.
Ever.
Never find any question.
So this solution is
My question,
Pop-Tarts.
though, is who put Michelle Obama in charge of what my children eat?
Yeah.
It's too personal a decision for the president's wife to be making for the rest of us. It's imposed from on high, like all their decisions. People resent the hell out of it. Even if, objectively, maybe there's some good sense. So you probably should get your kids to eat good food, but Michelle Obama shouldn't be involved in that.
Oh my gosh! You know what? I realized I've like lost my basic question card. That is so basic and it's so true. Who put her in charge of our food program?
She did. She put herself
But how is that
on.
possible? We didn't elect her as a nation.
Good point.
Like, that is so basic. How long have I been wrapping my brain around? Like 2 years with this subject?
Yeah.
So basic. How did we get here? How did the train get here?
You're a mom. You have kids. What do you think? Who do you think should be responsible? Should this be handled at the local level? Should individual schools make these decisions? Because what winds up happening is that you have government bureaucrats making decisions about nutrition. Who's to say they know anything?
Well, that's
about
two different questions, actually, because who's preparing the lunches and who's responsible are two different issues. I'm responsible as a parent. It's my responsibility to make sure that my child gets what he or she needs nutritionally rather. But the school can provide hot lunch, and I can choose that for my kid or not. But the responsibility and the accountability for my child's health rests with me, which again, I mean, my kids are both in grade school, and our public school system
I'm gonna
in
pause
my
it now.
Jersey city didn't send home a note that says,
So so her, you know, it was a very interesting clip because their solution to this problem was that it is the parents' responsibility, right? That's where the, but what's the flaw in that?
Free and reduced lunch.
Free and reduced lunch. There's so many kids where her argument was like, you know, if I don't like what's provided, I'm just going to do better, right? Like, and that is not an option. So we, you know, need to do better. And they had no solution other than Pop-Tarts.
It also assumes that all parents have decent nutritional education, that the parents know what is good and bad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there's, you know, definitely lots of issues with this.
Okay, so minimize,
Well-
make it a smaller version first.
And maybe don't, you know,
Sorry.
Well, a lot of these people don't really believe in a concept called public health. And even more fundamentally, they don't believe in a concept called the public.
Yeah.
So all that is wrapped up with this too.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, it was interesting to me because it was definitely personal animus almost towards the person who was putting the program forward. And it was interesting because then I was reflecting on the fact that, you know, healthcare was bad because Hillary Clinton tried to, and that's a different topic, but, you know, why are these first ladies speaking up or, you know, proposing anything at all is sort of one of the other questions that they're trying to.
So maybe that's why you don't.
Right, they should just fire National Security Council people. Like
I
Melania
thought
did.
it was Cape. That is
magic.
Make the small screen out of this.
Can we?
I don't see it. That's what I'm trying to do.
You could escape.
That's what we're trying to do.
Oh, it doesn't work.
No.
Any other
What if you put the
suggestions?
mouse at the top of the screen?
Don't ask me.
The mouse at the top of the screen.
Oh,
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Thank you.
You should just.
Students usually know what to do.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Mossy.
Right. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Bonus
That's okay. Wine's important. So other than food waste, I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about was that we have another issue, which is the sort of the public health issue that you were alluding to, which is we have a problem with childhood obesity in this country. Probably obesity in general, but certainly childhood obesity is pretty concerning because that's with them for the rest of their lives. So the statistics are that from the year 1970 till the present day, we've tripled our rates of childhood obesity, so between 5 to 17%. And the children that typically end up obese when they're if you're obese as a child, that continues. So you will probably be obese as an adult, be at higher risk for many chronic diseases. And so you would think that even the Republicans might care about this in some ways because it's costing us a lot of money in the national health care budget. So even if you're not concerned about individuals, as a nation collectively, there's a reason to care. So this is a map of the United States, and what's interesting to me is that there's apparently no state that's below 20% obesity rates. So every state is like, the lowest on this map it seems to be 20 to 25%. Yeah, so Massachusetts isn't doing that well, 25 to 30, and it's not doing as terribly as some other states, but there's probably other correlations here with poverty and obesity. So
And voting Republican.
potentially, yes. So.
Well, it breaks down in some of those yellow ones.
Well, and the poor nutrition affects children's learning and their ability to, it affects more than just being overweight and having physical health problems. It also affects their cognitive.
Right, so there's the mental health, and then probably also some psychological effects from feeling overweight, right? So
There are also lots of studies that show that the set point for diabetes and obesity is pretty much set in utero. That the fetus senses the environment of the mother, and then its ability to process sugar and the enzymes it does and the receptors are all set in the last trimester of pregnancy.
yeah.
And so
Yes, if
it's
you're
the mother, so it's mothers who really need to be taken care of so that doesn't happen.
Yes, but it also seems to be that children are getting things like type 2 diabetes earlier, so I'm sure that their own weight probably speeds up what might have been an inevitable thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like the cravings for the carbohydrates and stuff is all set to your biochemistry, and then what, those hormonal regulations of diet and appetite are set before the child's even born.
Right. But I also do think that there are studies where you can be diabetic and if you change your diet. So if you're, so I think that's, I think when you're in that situation, it helps to hear that, that you're not,
Doomed.
you're not doomed because your mother didn't do. Yeah.
Well, I think Michelle Obama's initiative was obviously step one and a good thing. I kind of agree with what they were saying on Fox, which was like, yeah, if you put vegetables on a kid's plate, it doesn't mean they're gonna eat them.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I was allowed to have school lunch once a week, and I would always pick pizza day because there was no vegetables on pizza day. And like, I have a distinct memory of these like gray green beans that I just never. Like, I never ate vegetables on the school lunches. They were disgusting. And no one was there to make them.
I'm not even sure my school lunches had.
They had fruit cups, I remember. So.
Right. Those who count. Yeah, and there at least in the school lunch that I looked at, there's a lot of corn, like probably canned corn in there to count. So we were not going to obviously watch this whole thing, but we'll sort of just get a sense as this goes. This is a really great documentary series. Have you guys seen it?
As Georgia, as heavy as I was.
It's called acanthosis. 18+% of our children right now are obese.
How right are you? About 280.
If you go with the flow in America today, you will end up overweight or obese, as 2/3 of Americans do.
I don't want to be fat for the rest of my life. I've got diabetes,
Sleep apnea.
high blood pressure.
I get dizzy when I get up.
Everything's hurting now. You don't crave broccoli, and our generation has grown up craving a Big Mac.
We have built a cheap food model, and that's the one we're dealing with right now.
It's so hard to combat against what the TV's telling you about your kids.
The kind of food that we eat is the kind that's most profitable.
Local, regional foods taste better.
The weight of the nation is out of control, but we can fix that.
How do you like the market?
Market mean everything for this neighborhood.
We have got to come together as a country and really make this a priority.
As long as we stick together, that's what it's about.
It's not only health, it's about survival and well-being of the United States as a nation.
The reason we have government in the first place is to solve problems collectively that we can't solve individually.
If we don't now take this as a really serious, urgent national priority, we are, all of us individually and as a nation, going to pay a really serious price.
We're in the
if we
midst
can
of an
watch too much
epidemic
of
of
this.
childhood
But I wanted to show you that clip with the girl who's the dancer. And I don't know if you were able to tell which girl it was, but she had a black leotard on and she looked like she was a a little bit on the heavier side, and they talk about her a little bit more in the documentary. And it was really, I mean, it's kind of hard to watch, you know, because the mother is concerned about this girl, and, you know, so she's saying things as she's feeding the child. You know, like, you shouldn't eat that, or so that's like a really hard dynamic to listen to. And then the girl also, you know, they say she was pretty skinny as a child, and then one of the things they said was that when she turned about 8 or 9, sort of when you're starting to hit puberty, she starts to put on a lot of weight, right? And she feels terrible about herself. She wants to be a dancer and doesn't think she can pursue this because she feels like that's not an option for her. So there's so much wrapped in this issue. And I'm struggling with this a little bit. This is partly why I wanted to talk about it, because I feel a little uncomfortable, you know, even though obesity is such a big issue, I feel a bit uncomfortable putting it in those terms in a children's book. In that book there's one statement in there which says, don't eat too much fat because it's going to make you fat. And I'm like, you know, that's not sort of like, I'm sort of hoping that maybe instead of talking about this directly, I can focus on things that will make you healthy or make your body strong. But I'm curious at the end if you guys have any thoughts about how one could touch on this in a way that feels respectful to, you know, the feelings of people who might be reading the book. So I'll leave that there, and then hopefully we can talk about it later. So maybe I can do that too. So at the end, I'd love to get some ideas from you. I'm going to tell you about my ideas, and then I'd love to hear from you about what you think are effective ways of reaching children about this. So hopefully I've sold you on this idea that this is something that children should care about, and that you know, we need, as a nation or collectively as a group, we need to think about it. And then I'm also curious what you wish, potentially, if you think back to your childhood, if there are things that you wish you knew or understood better about food, because that might give me ideas for topics to cover. And then I already talked about the idea of, you know, is it appropriate to bring up things like food waste or obesity in a children's book? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of the things that I want to put into the book, and then give you a little first few pages that I've written. So I had my 10-year-old draw this. It's a 10-year-old's vision, because she, again, I was telling you, I was using them as consultants. So this is funny if you know the names of my children. They are Sonia and Asha. So I have Sasha, who is, you know, and she's going to be the main character in the book, and her conversations are with her mom, who is a biochemist and also blonde in this picture. So I'm not sure why. She drew herself pretty accurately, but I look different. And so Sasha's complaining about school lunch. She says her sandwiches taste awful, and they're so soggy. And then the mom is saying reflectively that in the back. She told me the mother is in the background. That's why she's about the same size as Sasha. I hope she tells me if there's anything wrong with my lovingly prepared lunch. So she's a little sarcastic there. So for the idea with having this sort of narrative is that I think this is a hard, nonfiction books are kind of hard to read. And maybe there is a kid out there who, loves outer space or planets, and then they'll want to read that book, And there's probably kids who love food, but probably those kids are more likely to want to make the food, so they're probably more likely to buy that Disney princess cookbook than to buy a book about healthy eating. So in some ways, I'm hoping that narrative where you're building or showing the conflict from both points of view will sort of give them a way to relate to this issue. So we'll start with narratives and then do the, sort of science and then activities. So the things that I hope to talk about, certainly, the my plate and thinking about how you're deciding whether a lunch is healthy. And so, we saw this image before, half of your plate, they tell you it's supposed to be fruits and vegetables. And the nice thing is that most of us are able to do sort of those visual estimations a lot more easily than we can do, the old pyramid where you're like, oh, I should eat 15 grams of protein a meal. That makes no sense at all, right? So visual is great. But what I did realize was that some of these words don't make sense, right? So this is the orange is not a protein. they say protein here. Fruits and vegetables are pretty obvious what they mean, but what do they mean by protein, right? And what do they mean about meals that are not arranged in this way, where everything is mixed like the chicken stew? You know, how do you decide if that's kind of a healthy meal? So those are some of the things that I think are limitations of this graphic. Do you guys have anything to?
I have a couple. I just have a lot of like issues on my plate, but
Yeah.
some of those are just personal. I think one of the things is that it's still, and this is what you're saying, like it's still really vague. Like I had to do work with this with my plate once, and Harvard School of Public Health put out like the Harvard equivalent.
Yeah.
And it tries to be more specific while still like being approachable. So it's talking about like how whole grains are different, and it gets rid of dairy. It's like, well, that's an option, but a lot of this, it's not as severe as the pyramid was, but a lot of this looks the way it does because of, you know, if you like trace the funding back and where the money in the USDA is.
Yeah, there was a very specific reason dairy's in that picture,
Exactly.
right? So, yeah. So, I don't know. I completely hear what you're saying. My sense is I want to use what the government is telling you and then have that conversation.
Yeah, 'cause
like,
that's
do
what
you
we'll see in
really need the
schools,
dairy? Yeah.
No, I think that just graphically, I think the dairy is confusing. Touching the plate but being separate.
Yeah.
And why is
Milk
it just
body.
a fruit
a
milk?
glass of milk.
Yeah.
Right.
Milk
So,
body.
Or like a yogurt.
Yeah.
right. And so, you know, it is also confusing because some of these are biomolecules, that's how I think of a protein, and some of these are whole foods, you know, so it's not super clear how they're separating
Kids are
these
not going
things.
to necessarily know where a protein comes from, number one. So say you get protein on your plate, what does that mean to them?
Right.
And grain, what do they understand by the word grain?
Right.
You know, I mean,
Yeah. So even though this graphic is very much designed with kid-friendly colors and images, it really isn't necessarily translatable to a kid without more.
I think also you can have fruits or vegetables that are awful for you. Like some of the ones that are pre-processed and have lots of preservatives in them, or stabilizers, or and so you could be following that and still have a really
Right, fruit cup,
Yeah.
corn from the can, you know. I mean, if that's your only option, that's, you know, you should probably still eat that because you're still going to get vitamins from it. It's probably not as good as your kale salad or.
So why though have this image, and why do you need that in your book to do what you want to do?
Well, I feel like if this is the messaging that goes to schools, and I'm thinking of this book as being something that they use potentially in a school setting, I would like for them to be able to translate this into why is it that we need all these things,
What
and
if
what
you
do they?
What if you translated it? What if you gave
This image
this
and then
image
something.
and then here's
or create your own new
that's
plate.
what I meant. Create
Yeah. Like a more
Because one thing
specific.
that's not mentioned,
Yes.
not mentioned is volume. Like
Right.
there's no mention of
Right.
Yeah,
this
I
much
don't know what
protein
the-
and
yeah.
3 carrots spread out
Right.
over half your
Yeah.
plate, right? Yeah, so maybe
So-
like visuals of different kinds of plates that would meet that, you know, I feel like continuing, I like the fact that it's visual.
You could do a takedown of things like Bosco sticks. Like, what is a Bosco? This is something they serve at the cafeteria.
I don't even
What's
know
a
what that
Bosco?
is.
Oh my gosh! You don't know what a Bosco stick?
No.
Well, a Bosco stick is like basically a breadstick stuffed with mozzarella cheese, and they give it with marinara, and that's a lunch. So there's a way of like instructing what looks like something that would be good, and like why maybe eating the Bosco stick lunch is.
Even though it has cheese, which is technically protein,
Right.
the frying and the breading.
What if you're? Oh, what if
Lois
you're?
is better.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I like your idea of starting with this text, let's call it this image, because that's what they see, and then you can give alternatives, you can deconstruct it, you can amplify it. But I don't think it's wise to just ignore what they're seeing all the time. I think it's good for you to address that and then provide your own.
Yeah, no, this is great. I love all the ideas.
What if you have other recipes or something? Maybe at the bottom of every recipe, you put it somehow is related back to
Yeah,
it as,
okay.
as where
Like
it
that.
falls or where, how
Like,
many
yeah,
of the
percentage
categories
of each
it is.
section, how much it
Yeah, or
has.
something like that.
And I like that idea too because just growing up, I didn't eat food that looked like this. Like a lot of Indian dishes are not
Yeah,
at all
exactly.
separate like that.
Right.
And you know, if someone said, "Are you eating healthy?" I would have no way of assessing that with this
Right.
image without doing
Right.
like some more complicated math. So
So you said your age group was like late elementary, early middle school?
yeah,
And for me, that's like 6th grade, and that was like the height of my Larkin's rebellious phase,
yeah,
where I just like would not listen to anyone. And I think my reaction to something like this would be like, oh, these are more people telling me what I have to do, and I like would completely disregard it.
yeah.
So I think if that's the age group you're targeting, I would recommend like, how do you make this the cool thing? Like how, like you want me to get to the point of this is cool and I want to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and let me think that I got there on my own, as opposed
Yeah.
to telling me like, this is healthy, this is what you should do. 'Cause
Right.
I would just shut this all out.
Right.
That age.
So do you think that conversation between the child and the mother, where you're presenting the child's point of view and having the child figure it out on their own,
In 6th
would
grade, you
help?
don't want to
In
be
6th
considered a child.
Yeah,
Right,
like
okay.
I would just like also in 6th grade would be like, I'm way too cool for this. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like I think that conversation between the kid and the child feels more like 4th grade to me.
Yeah, no, I think that what maybe I do mean 3rd to 5th grade as
Okay,
my
so yeah.
target audience. So
So a little younger.
a little younger, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I thought I was less cool then, but I was definitely starting
Yeah.
maybe cool is like the most important thing ever. So
Yeah.
really hard.
Well, so let me ask you this question. Well, the other thing that I think that a lot of kids like, I've done outreach work, and a lot of kids seem to care about the environment, right? So like presenting the idea with the chapter starting with food waste and saying, you know, making choices like throwing your orange in the trash kind of has
The school system around here does Nature's Classroom.
Yeah.
And they measure your food waste over the weekend while you're there. They call it the Org Challenge, and it was a competitive thing, so different cabins would
Yeah, so that's partly what I have in there. And my daughter just came back.
Into it, and I
from-
still think about that all the time, and that was like 5th grade. So.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I do have I have the Org Challenge, but like some other variations of it that you could potentially do, and then also like a little bit that explains, you know, all the different potential impacts that food waste has. But I appreciate that, you know, hearing honest feedback. You're not gonna, and you know, it's like anything. Like I think there's probably some children that you're gonna reach, and you know, so I like everything that where you have to modify behavior. I don't think one intervention or one thing will be the answer, but but yeah, I'll think about how to be cool, which is going to be really hard for me. So I'll be honest.
None of us are too cool. Let's be honest.
Can I add one?
yeah.
I actually have a 3rd and a 5th grader.
Yeah.
And we do sometimes battle over the school lunches.
Yeah.
And so we frame it in terms of a balance, and we'll like talk through like, well, where do you think this, you know, like they're not buying pancakes
Right.
with corn syrup on them. But like I have to get them to come to that realization on their own. So we talk a little bit. So one thing that's not on here, we focus a lot more on sugar than we do on carbs.
Yeah.
Like, or even fat. Like I don't care how much fat they eat. Like if we could talk about like what a reasonable amount of sugar is, and we like embed that throughout their day. Like, well, you had cereal this morning. You had a kashi. Yeah, whatever. It still has sugar in it, and you had ketchup at lunch. Like maybe we're not going to have dessert tonight. So like talk about like your balance of sugar intake, and sugar is not on here at all, and I find like that.
I mean, it would technically probably fall under the grain because that's supposed to be the carbs on this plate, but yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll talk to them about like, well, if they need 2 snacks, which just the concept of snacks aggravates me no end, but they're insistent on having them. Like one of them has to be protein based, and only one of them can be carb based.
Yeah.
And then we also have the concept of it's sort of something that Michael Pollan said that like you can eat all the junk food you want as long as you make it yourself. So like we'll like actively make a really unhealthy dessert from scratch together and like get to eat it over a few days. Or like the other concept is like you can't be hungry for specific things. So like if you're ever hungry, we always have apples. There's apples in my house all year round, and they can always help themselves, and they will sometimes do that. But
But if you cut it up and put it on a plate on the
and
table,
they'll
then
more
they'll
likely
eat
to do
it.
it. But they'll all eat a whole apple,
Yeah.
like when they're actually hungry. So like the concept of balance and like always having access to food is a key
Right.
one for them. Like you can always have this; it's always there.
Yeah.
And then like the backup is the cheese stick.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But
In our
it's not
house, it's
stuffed in bread
bananas and
and
cheese. Yeah.
You mentioned that you didn't think that kids would be into nonfiction, and I don't know if that's true. My daughter, who's in 4th grade, loves learning like the nonfiction or
Yeah.
things of why things work.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think that's a way of actually circumventing the kind of rebellious, like this is what you should do. I mean, in more of a.
So you think the
This is-
narrative
Look
would.
how cool this is.
Yeah, look how interesting this is. This is what's happening. This is what sugar does to your body. This is how much sugar you're eating, and graph it.
But
Yeah.
you know, the fascinating thing is this rebelliousness is between parents and child. It's not between teacher and children. Usually when they do projects, they are very happy. All my children will come and lecture us about things
Right,
that
but
they
they're
learned from
learning
class.
something, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like.
So if you
yeah.
incorporate it into something they learn, they feel they are
Mhm.
invested in it, rather
Mhm.
than a dynamic
totally.
of their parents telling them or friends telling them.
Because when they're learning, the power is theirs.
Yeah.
Right. So are you making an argument that a narrative where you're having a parent-child conversation might be?
No, I'm just making the argument that
Don't
I don't
be
think you
shy
should be
about it.
afraid to give them something interesting and meaty to grapple with. Yeah.
Pointers to teachers
Yeah.
to use to talk about these things.
Yeah.
I think they don't talk enough. Or if they talk about this, it's at an age where the kids, they don't register.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with Andy about sugar. I actually think sugar is the worst thing. The
Yeah.
worst thing about the American diet.
Well, my idea for that sugar chapter is, the kid says, "Oh, my coach says I shouldn't eat sugary snacks during a meet," right? Like, which is really what my kids' coaches like. They're like, because they sell concessions at the swim meets, and they're cupcakes and brownies, and and that's like the worst possible because you just like. Your blood sugar goes up and you crash, unless you're constantly eating that through the meat, which would also be terrible. So sort of like framing it in like, oh, this is a conversation. So why, if sugar gives you energy, right? Like glucose is our primary source of fuel. Like what are the issues around it? It's how you're delivering it in a way.
Right, and because if it was fruits, it would be delivered in a different way with the fiber.
Yeah.
And that's
slows it down, or even with protein, or
Is it
or whole
correct
grains.
that non-fructose sugar, this artificial sweeteners, is also adding to the problem because it signals to the body this is sugar, so you have.
Yeah. So
Like
yes,
there's no
Diet Coke
insulin.
didn't make us all.
So essentially, the sweet flavor is part of the problem.
I mean, yes, because we're
It's sweeter than sugar.
like biologically, we've all evolved to want as much of that sugar as possible, right? So.
I was just imagining a page or a spread in the book of photographs of plates of food. Maybe starting with one that looks like this, but then also one that has dessert on it, or Indian food, or so that kids can start to make the problematizing move that you made, that what usually shows up on my plate looks nothing like that, but is quite healthy. And maybe throughout the book you can be then calling back to some of those pictures and saying, so what's with the dessert on that one? It doesn't show up in the government, but you're eating it.
Right.
So let's talk about that.
I love all this. This is exactly what I want in terms of feedback, but I'm a little worried because I'm not taking notes. I'm going to forget.
Video.
Okay, great. I can
You'll watch yourself.
I'll watch myself. That's a great thing.
I think you don't want a book, you want an app. Because an idea like
I
this,
did think about that.
instead of, you could start with a bunch of pictures of plates, but as you go through the app and days pass, these plates, these pictures are going to change and be more of a cache of what you look at more often. And then you could make it like a social game where, where you can say, this is my plate tonight. With your friends, you can compete. So you take a picture of your plate, and then they're going to judge how good you are eating that, like 0 to 5 stars. I think it's a great idea.
How did we get to the table like this, man? I just am noticing, one side versus the other side. Yeah.
I think there is a value in starting with this
Yeah.
kind of image, but in light of what Sarah just said, this forces people to think in categories.
Yeah.
When actually my experience and your experience are exactly the same, is that food doesn't come in this bracketing.
Exactly.
Yeah?
I feel like this is more of the
And that's
American
what essentially
plate.
lots of cafeterias in the United States do, is I think what protein, I think a specific something separate from vegetables.
Yeah.
So one, it looks very much artificially put together and very unappetizing.
Yeah.
And here we want our kids to eat it.
Right.
So they are going to divert to something that
Mhm.
feels more related to them, and often that's end up being the muffin, the pancakes, because it looks exactly like what it's done. But this is not the meal that. So possibly, if you want to offer your own interpretation on this, is trying to deconstruct that categorization and that separation of these categories and move more.
I have a solution, that's machine learning.
Well,
Just keep going. Just keep going.
I'll just add something.
We're out of time.
You'll hear a tiny bit more about my mother in my presentation, but she was a nutrition nut long before it hit. This was in the 50s with Adele Davis. I don't know if any of you know about her. And, she had us putting brewer's yeast in our orange juice. It was pathetic for a while. We thought she was completely nuts. Anyway, then she relented a little bit. But then there was another craze, which actually, it had categories, but it made sense. She realized we were eating too much of X, Y, and Z. She said, from now on, every meal, we'll have, it was more fish and chicken rather than beef. It wasn't fried, etc. But she said, we're always going to have a tossed salad of fresh vegetables, and we're always going to have 2 cooked vegetables with every meal. So she had strict categories, but it didn't mean that they couldn't be related in a stew or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it left things open, but those were her new principles.
But yeah, I think
And
it's good
it
to
actually,
present.
it worked.
So I'm gonna just
Because
move
she's
us
a cook.
quickly because I know
yeah.
Lois has a lot to say too.
I don't know much to say.
So this is from McGee, the Harold McGee, the reading I had posted, and so it is, this idea that dairy was one of the categories on that, and really dairy is quite complex. So if you're looking at whole milk, it has fat, protein, and carbohydrates because lactose is a sugar. And so what's really, there's several things that are interesting here. One is that the human milk, which is the first food that any of us ever had, actually is quite low in protein. Most people think of milk as being a protein-rich food. And, cow's milk is really not a good substitute, which is one of the reasons why you cannot give infants cow's milk. You'd have to give them formula if you were choosing not to breastfeed. So there's a couple of other types of milk on here. So there's goat and sheep. So some of the cheeses that you tasted were made from goat's milk and sheep's milk. And they're a little bit different. You can see that sheep's milk has higher protein in it. So if you're making cheeses from sheep's milk, you have to account for that higher protein content to get it to coagulate or come out of the mixture. And goat's milk has more of a different kind of fat, which is smaller chain fatty acids. So that's why goat's cheese, maybe you might have been able to tell which ones are goat's cheese by the aroma. So it has a very particular aroma that we associate with goat's cheese. So there's lots of interesting chemistry in there. But one of the things that I was hoping to do, even though I have issues with dairy and milk in general, it's kind of an interesting food to talk about because a lot of people are familiar with it, has all these different categories of molecules in it. It also can get connected to things like food allergies. So, a lot of children have experiences with friends who have food allergies, so getting them to understand what a food allergy is. And so this idea with the milk protein, again, if infants consume it, there's proteins in the milk that fragment and go into your blood system if your digestive system isn't fully ready to handle it, and so often the immune response is to proteins in the milk. So this typically happens when you're young, and a lot of people will grow out of this type of allergy. And there's a second thing, which is intolerance to certain types of food, which is also interesting with milk because of lactose. So it's kind of a funny thing, right? Because we have evolved as mammals to consume milk as our first food. So why are all these people lactose intolerant then? So it turns out that as infants, we all have this enzyme, lactase, that can break down the lactose sugar. But there's no benefit to continuing to produce this enzyme as we get older. So for vast majorities of the world's population, most of us are lactose intolerant, whether or not we know it. Like some of us have learned to accept some amount of lactose. If you have too much for most of the world, you will have the typical symptoms of lactose intolerance are bloating and gas. So basically the lactose is going through your digestive system without getting broken down, and then the bacteria in your gut will start to use it, and then that's what produces the gas and the discomfort that you have. So, but what's interesting is, do you guys know which populations tend to have the highest percentage that can tolerate lactose? So there's parts of the world
that can tolerate it?
Yeah, they can.
They can as Europeans?
Yeah, it's Northern European, so Scandinavian countries, France. So those are populations that tend to have a lot of cheese culture, but also can tolerate a lot of lactose and dairy. So that's, so I think there's room to use milk in this way to, talk about the fact that cheese is a protein, but also talk about how it's connected to things like food allergy. I obviously wouldn't put something this complicated in my book.
This is where I got one of the places I got lost.
Maybe I should be shooting higher. I'm let's step it up here. Let's talk about those calcium.
It's okay.
It's very interesting.
It's okay if it was graphically changed.
If
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So if it wasn't as complicated.
Because I was going to even say something about you had the disaccharides on the other.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a complicated figure.
Right.
To understand, you have to know a lot of stuff.
Right.
To understand what's going on there.
Yes. It's not at all obvious what the molecule is.
No, but it also, or why it's there, or anything. But what you could do is you could change the molecule design, and maybe get rid of a few things like the betas and stuff and the positioning, and change it so that it was, I don't know, like a storybook picture of molecules.
Yeah, this is part of my learning curve is to learn how to talk chemistry to a younger audience. And
or a lay audience.
Yeah, or a lay audience,
Yeah.
That's weird.
We're good standards.
There are some in this room.
Yeah.
My people.
Yes. So in addition to harassing my 10-year-old,
you can harass some of us.
Harass
Right. Different kind of dialogue will happen though.
Yeah. So I think I probably don't have time to show you all of this, but so this is the cheese that you tasted. We made that at home, and it's very easy to make. It's probably one of the recipes I was hoping to include in my book. So basically you boil whole milk and you add, once it gets to 205 degrees, you can add lemon juice and orange juice. So I don't know if any of you tasted citrus in the cheese. And you can see the nice curd formation. So you can see protein coagulation there, which is also that link that I sent you with the casein molecules forming the gels. And I have to say, no matter how many times I do this, there's something slightly magical about that moment where the curd forms. So I think it could be fun for the kids to do. There's lots of interesting chemistry. Again, I'm going to have to think about, how much to include that seems appropriate and understandable to a lay audience. But the idea that people can potentially taste goat cheese and realize it tastes different from cow's milk cheeses, and talk about it maybe in terms of the molecules that break down from proteins or fat or lactose, and there's lots of really interesting aroma molecules that are formed, but again, I'm going to keep us moving because I know I'm running out of time. So these are the cheeses you tasted. If you took any notes down on what they were, you can compare your notes with what's on the screen. So the raclette was the raw cow, it's a raw cow cheese, and I like the description where there's this sneaky finish of funk, which is actually a molecule. So they're stinky cheeses, right? Like, so that was something that they said that particular cheese had. The Levin Brothers was a goat cheese. I don't know if anyone got that was a goat cheese when they were tasting it. And then there's one that's a mixture, the Giselle. And they described that as being floral and cinnamony. And then there was a sheep cheese, actually 2 of them. So the soft cheese was also a sheep cheese. So did you feel like you were able to tell that they were from potentially different sources of milk? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what else might be useful for us to know about that, other than we might prefer the taste of one rather
well,
than
certainly
another?
if you're going to make the cheese, you wouldn't have to know like that chart that, that sheep's milk has more protein in it. So if you were adding something to coagulate the protein, you'd have to account for that. Like you would add more of the rennet or the kind of thing. Or more
In terms
acid.
of health, is there anything that we might want to know?
So it turns out that the milk allergy that I was talking about with the protein, all of these different mammals, and in fact even different types of cow species, like Jersey versus Holstein, actually have different proteins in them. So there are people who think they're allergic to cow's milk, but then they'll try the milk from a different breed of cow if you're able to source it and you live near a farm, and they'll find out that you're actually not allergic. So for things like allergies, potentially it might matter. So yeah. Does that sort of get at your question?
Lactose intolerance, does that go through all cheeses, or is it mainly from cow's milk? Do people have the same level of intolerance to other, like to sheep or?
Lactose is the same in all of these milks, but the harder the cheese, there tends to be less lactose in it. Mm-hmm. So potentially that could be something that's useful to connect. I think in general, cheese has less lactose than drinking milk, so often people are able to tolerate eating cheese, even if they're lactose intolerant, more than actually consuming the dairy. So, yeah, so some of this is I'm going to have to figure out how to hook it in there, but I was hoping to at least include this recipe if you guys thought it tasted okay.
It was delicious.
So that's, pretty simple, I think doable for potentially that 3rd to 5th grade range, would you say, Andy? So, I don't know if your kids make foods, but
yeah, some. We make maple syrup each year.
So,
we make
yeah.
kimchi.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe cheese.
You have fun.
And then I was thinking they could do experiments that are based off that. So if you made the same type of cheese with skim milk instead of whole milk, and you didn't have the fat, and you were coagulating the protein, they could actually work out how much protein was in their milk, which might be kind of fun. So you kind of understand where that food label comes from, and get estimates. Maybe they could compare goat's milk or sheep's milk if they could find it to cows. So I just want to, if I'm not running out of time.
I think you one more last thing.
I'm just going to hand this out and then see if people can take a quick look at it,
or maybe give it back to you.
Yeah.
Because I think it's probably not enough time to read it now.
Sorry.
And to give you feedback now, but I think we'd all like to give you feedback.
Yeah,
so
that
can we
sounds
give you feedback
like
at a different time?
Yeah, you can return the document to me another time. So.
But only if you send us the recipe for how to make the cheese.
Okay. Yeah.
Put it on our site.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you guys for all your.
Thank you.
But let's have a break.
Yeah. So we'll take a 5-minute break, but before you leave the room, let's see, what was I going to say? Noah asked if, how many people cared about whether or not they got email reminders about events.